It was a similar sentiment when our panellist Connor English talked last week on the show. He used his I've Been Thinking slot to encourage everyone to bring back hugging.
I think we've underestimated the power of the hug, and you mentioned, Carla, suicide, and we've got a lot of mental health issues in New Zealand, and our solution is money, government and drugs. I don't understand why more people just don't hug their kids, hug their relatives. I'm not talking about going to work and hugging everyone in the corridor. Well, I think sometimes we overlook the simple.
Yeah.
And maybe just giving your kids a hug and telling them you love them is actually going to be as good for them as any inquiry into mental health.
So this may be an overly cautious approach to the rules, but you can see, Sue, why teachers have shied away from contact?
Yes, and I'm certainly all for hugging, as he mentioned, Connor mentioned. It seems to me that it's an example of where the lawmakers and Parliament MPs rushed in to sort of try and solve a problem, rushed in with some legislation. And it also shows how difficult it is to make laws about human behaviour. So now we have the Minister saying the balance is not quite right. Yes. Not only is there the issue with hugging, but apparently they have incidences where kids are throwing chairs and smashing windows, and the teachers feel powerless to intervene. So clearly I agree with the Minister, something's not quite right, still haven't got the balance right, and with the Education Council, which says the rules need to be clarified. Get on and clarify them.
What do you reckon, Gary?
Oh, absolutely. It's ridiculous, firstly, that children who are possibly going to do themselves harm and other people's harm cannot be restrained. But, natural human emotions, if you see a child in trouble who's upset, you should be able to hug them, for goodness sake. And so that, it has to be changed. It's ridiculous.
I remember being strapped when I was at school, so it's great that we've moved away from that era.
You were strapped?
I was strapped, yes, absolutely.
What
Girls
for?
as well as boys. Can't even remember. Numerous, rebellious incidences, yes.
Probably because you couldn't remember. They probably decided to strap you.
Yeah,
lack of memory.
Yeah.
Wonders, don't they? What have we come to as a society when a person might have fallen over or might be having a bad day, and you just can't, as a teacher, just get a card and give a quick hug?
Absolutely. And the other incidents they give is when a parent is dropping off a child and the child is crying and doesn't want to go in, and the parent says, would you mind just taking my child, into the classroom? And they say, well, I can't because it's a breach of the guidelines. So clearly we haven't got the balance right here.
It's a tough decision for teachers to be in, though, Gary, isn't it, really?
Well, it has been. I mean, teachers have been put in a really awful situation with so much sensitivity about these things that they don't know where to go. And most teachers, or people who are drawn to teaching, are quite naturally affectionate, considerate and caring of children. So we've put them in an impossible situation.
Do you think that teachers have just on a final note, do you think that teachers have, their workload is just an enormous scheduling workload compared to maybe 40 or 50 years ago? So what do you think? Because
absolutely.
But they've been asked to do so much.
No, I mean, I salute all teachers. I think we need to pay them more, support them more, respect them more, and reduce some of their workloads, or they'll be burnt out and we'll have none left.
Sue Kesley, Gary McCormick, it's been wonderful to have Monday with you. Thank you very much for both your time. I'm Wallace Chapman. See you tomorrow, 3:45 sharp.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, a damning report into urology services at the Southern DHB shows it failed at least 4 patients. The DHB sent apology letters to them all, but one patient who now has secondary cancer doesn't want words, he wants action. Should a young man who died after repeatedly smashing his head against the floor and walls of a police cell been in a detox centre instead? Armed police are patrolling the streets of Wairoa after shots are fired at an officer's house and the local police station. The All Blacks' glorious weekend win is ancient history, with the squad back in training ahead of the looming semi-finals. And the revealing interview with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Is the life in the firm all it's cracked up to be?
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. No, my hi to my good afternoon. I'm Paul Brennan. Armed police will patrol the streets of Wairoa after two shootings at the weekend. The home of a police officer and the local police station were blasted. Acting Eastern District Commander Ian Chapman says it's natural to assume the events are linked. He says in recent months the police have ramped up their presence in the town in response to rising gang numbers driven by the methamphetamine trade. In June, Operation Rugby launched, which brought police, local leaders, iwi and gang leaders together to address the behaviour of a few individuals.
The actions last night aren't a much wider. This is one or two individuals who have decided to go and take that next step. And so what we're relying upon is the goodwill of the people of Wairoa, the wider community, to sit back and say, actually, no, this isn't okay, and to come forward with that information to help solve it.
Acting Eastern District Commander Ian Chapman, an armed response team is patrolling the town 24 hours a day until further notice. Methamphetamine dealers who can prove their own personal addiction played a role in their offending are now eligible for a sentence discount of up to a third. It's one of many changes to meth sentencing options laid out in a Court of Appeal judgment, overhauling the guidelines used by judges since 2005. Judges are now also encouraged to consider how a background of poverty and deprivation may impair a person's judgment. The head of the Drug Foundation, Ross Bell, says it's good the courts have acknowledged methamphetamine offending doesn't happen in a vacuum. He says the judgment reflects a societal acceptance that drug offending should be treated as a health issue first and foremost.
And I think it's really important for them to say that someone with an addiction, where their offending is sort of caused by their addiction, then alternative approaches need to be taken. And I think that is welcome news.
The Executive Director of the Drug Foundation, Ross Bell. The Health and Disability Commissioner says the Southern District Health Board failed patients who spent months waiting for urology services. A report released today says the Health Board breached patient rights on 4 occasions. One man waited double the target time frame for treatment and wasn't properly informed about a date for his surgery. Another waited 5 months for an initial referral, then 7 weeks for a biopsy despite being flagged as urgent. One waited 4 months for treatment and wasn't seen until his GP made a second referral, noting a high suspicion of cancer. And it took an urgent referral from a gynaecologist for a woman to have a treatment 6 months after being booked in. Health and Disability Commissioner Anthony Hill says there were strained relationships within the Health Board and a lack of willingness to find solutions together. He made a number of recommendations, including apologising to the 4 patients. The National Party leader has described light rail for Auckland as a slow-moving economic train wreck that will hoover up the transport budget for years to come. The Transport Minister is defending delays as a highly compelling alternative proposal is investigated, but says he's had no advice there'll be a cost blowout. The Deputy Prime Minister, Winston Peters, says he'll be keeping a close eye on costs after warnings from an industry source. The Transport Ministry is considering 2 proposals, one from the Transport Agency and the other from a joint venture between the Super Fund and the Canada Infrastructure Bank. Opposition leader Simon Bridges is not only questioning the cost but the conduct of the Super Fund.
A super fund, I think, very cynically has tried to short-circuit that process, and unfortunately it seems like there's people stupid enough within the Beehive and the Ministry of Transport and Transport Agency to entertain that.
The National leader Simon Bridges, the Super Fund, has been approached for comment. A police officer says a young man would have been cared for at a detoxification centre the night he died in a South Auckland police cell if the centres existed. 21-year-old Sentry Taitoko died in a suicide watch cell at the county's Manukau police station in February 2014 after throwing his body against the cell's floor and walls. Today, a coronial inquest heard he was taken into custody for breach of the peace after consuming methamphetamine, alcohol and LSD. The officer in charge of the police's investigation into his death, Detective Senior Sergeant Ross Elwood, said if there were specific detoxification centres, the level of care would be very different.
If you had a detoxification centre, there would be the health aspect to it. Police cells are intended for housing prisoners, not intended for as a health complex.
Detective Senior Sergeant Ross Elwood. A Dunedin company has received $40,000 of funding from Callaghan Innovation to develop prototype facial recognition technology for sheep. The revolutionary technology will eliminate the need for costly electronic identification or plastic ear tagging. Iris Data Sciences Managing Director Greg Perot says the technology is based on the same principles used in human facial recognition. He hopes the technology can be showcased on a farm by early next year, and it will help prevent rustling by tracking animal locations as well as estimate weight and identify disease. It's 4 minutes past 5. On to sport now. The veteran halfback Benji Marshall will captain the Kiwis in Friday night's test against Australia in Wollongong, 7 years after last leading the New Zealand side. He replaces fullback Dallin Watene-Zelezniak, who has led the Kiwis in their last 5 tests but is out injured. The 34-year-old Marshall only returned to the Kiwis 4 months ago following a 7-year absence. It will be his 29th test and his 20th as captain, having made his debut in 2005, and he'll surpass Gary Freeman for the most tests as Kiwi captain. The football Ferns defender Abby Erceg has led the North Carolina Courage to a third straight final in the National Women's Soccer League in the United States. Erceg captains the Courage, who will play the Chicago Red Stars in next week's final. It will be Erceg's 4th straight championship final, having twice won the title previously. The Black Caps captain, Kane Williamson, is one of just 2 New Zealanders drafted for the inaugural The 100 cricket competition in England. Williamson has been signed by the Birmingham Phoenix for nearly $200,000, while the Manchester Originals have picked up left-arm spinner Mitchell Santner for $100,000. White Ferns Sophie Devine and Susie Bates have been announced as 2 of the 8 marquee players for the women's competition. Devine will join Williamson at the Birmingham Phoenix, while Bates has been signed by the Southern Brave. The new format of cricket will see teams face 100 balls in an innings, 20 fewer than a 2020 match. That's the news.
New Zealand First youth wing flexes its muscles.
Young Kiwis who do believe in economic justice, but they don't want all the political correctness, anti-free speech or climate alarmism crap that other parties of the left produce.
Trying and failing to turn out the vote.
It takes some time to put some mana back into the people on the street when they're downtrodden and when they're just trying to tread water to make a living.
And World Cup semi-finalists sorted.
New Zealand should be ready for us, because we're coming hard. You guys better be ready. We're coming hard.
All the big battles. Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Then on 9 to noon, how do hydrogen fuel cell vehicles and EVs stack up? Should the two technologies compete, or is it better for the government to pick a winner? And after 10, 2-time Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Jake Bernstein on the evolution of the world of offshore money revealed by the Panama Papers. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air, of course. Here's the short forecast now from Met Service through to midnight tomorrow, Tuesday. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mostly fine. Isolated showers, mainly about the ranges. For the remainder of the North Island, cloudy periods with a few showers, possibly heavy from Waitomo southwards tomorrow evening. Marlborough and Nelson, cloudy periods, isolated showers, mainly about the ranges. However, showers becoming widespread tomorrow evening. Bulla and Westland, periods of rain or showers, with isolated thunderstorms possible tomorrow. Fiordland, Southland and Clutha, showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow. Canterbury and Otago, excluding Clutha, scattered showers, some heavy and possibly thundery with hail, about now and into the evening. Rain spreading north from tomorrow afternoon, possibly heavy for a time, and falling as snow above 400 metres. At the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with a few showers, but rain for a time tomorrow. 8 minutes past 5.
And you're with Checkpoint if you're just joining us, and I'm Lisa Owen. The Southern DHB has been forced to apologise to 4 urology patients for falling short in their treatment and care. Problems that likely cut the life expectancy of one man who now has secondary cancer. The Health and Disability Commissioner has released a report on urology services at the DHB today after receiving 38 complaints since the beginning of 2016. The report, which investigates the treatment of 4 patients, found lengthy delays in assessment and treatment resulted in substantial clinical risk. The time taken to treat one man was almost twice the recommended target. And to make things worse, quote, many patients waited with no treatment and no information about when they would be treated. The DHB also failed to deal with patient complaints properly. The report found the DHB did little in the way of planning for urology services despite demand outstripping capacity, with delays becoming the norm. And it makes several recommendations. We'll take a look at those shortly. But first, the 4 patients are named in the report as patients A, B, C and D. Stephen Hoffman is patient B. He was referred to the Southern DHB in September 2016 by his GP, who had a high suspicion that Mr. Hoffman had prostate cancer. He should have been seen in weeks. Instead, it took months. Checkpoint's South Island reporter Logan Church travelled to Gore to meet him.
I wish to pass on my sincere apologies for the delay experienced and for the distress caused to you and your family during your treatment at South Southern DHB.
I'm sitting at the kitchen table of Stephen Hoffman, a 64-year-old cancer battler. He lives in Gore, 2 hours drive from Dunedin. He's reading out a letter sent to him last month by the Southern DHB.
The level of care you received was unacceptable. We are acutely aware of...
Stephen Hoffman's cancer journey began with the Southern DHB just over 3 years ago, back in September 2016.
It was actually my wife's birthday. My doctor puts together a referral for me, enlarged, hard, prostrate, high suspicion of cancer.
3 days later, the 15th of September, the DHB classified Stephen as Priority 3, meaning semi-urgent, expected to be seen within 6 weeks. But nothing happened.
It got close to Christmas and I just said to my wife, I said, well, I'm not going to get seen this year, so consequently it rolled into next year.
Stephen was only seen in late February 2017.
20th of February, we have this appointment. And basically, the hospital says, after I got triagged, I got lost in the system. 5 months had gone by. Should have been seen and done in 61 days. The surgeon, he said to me, if he'd known about it, you would have been seen, all done in 61 days. That would have probably meant that I wouldn't have needed any radiation, chemo, gone through all that, and I would have been ready for work at the start of 2017, and I would have been out in the workforce making money for the country as a taxpayer. As it is, I'll never work again.
Stephen thought the delay was over.
So I see the specialist and I get told I need an urgent biopsy. The letter apparently had a big circle around it, A urgent with a big star beside it. I just got told I needed a biopsy. I didn't get told how urgent that was. So anyway, get told 2 to 5 weeks. I ring on the day of 2 weeks and the girl says to me, oh, you're not even in the system. How? And here's me going, oh, geez, I'm lost again.
And during this wait, life was getting difficult. He lived on pills and tablets and multivitamins. He struggled to pee.
I'd been driving a log truck. On that day, on the 20th of February, they stuck a catheter in me. So for the next 19 weeks, I drove that log truck with this blooming catheter in me. And it actually was quite funny. A couple of times I pinched that bag and there was bloody stuff running everywhere. And I'm telling the guys to get out of the road on the skid site and turned it into a bit of a laugh.
Stephen's prostate was removed on the 6th of July 2017. During this time he couldn't work. His holiday leave and savings dried up. He put in an ACC claim in 2017. Checkpoint spoke to him at the time. That claim was eventually accepted and he got a payout. But as Stephen Hoffman's story came to light, so did others. The DHB Chief Executive Chris Fleming confirmed to Checkpoint at the time that Stephen was one of at least 6 men whose cancer had spread while they were waiting for treatment. In June 2017, an external review slammed the Southern DHB's urology services, recommending an extensive list of changes and reviews to service size, backlogs, resources and staff deployment. Both the national-led government and the Southern DHB said changes are underway. Stephen also complained to the Health and Disability Commissioner. But fast forward to now, 2 years later, he's got some bad news.
The family wanted to go on a bit of a trip. They're going to go on it, I'm not going now, because I really couldn't answer the insurance questions properly, so I asked for a CT scan, which was actually 7 months ahead of a routine one I was going to get, so I'm lucky in that way, but so the result came back. I was just expecting to be able to fill out the questions for the insurance, but the result came back. They said, he called me in and said, right, you've got cancer in your lungs now.
That was 4 months ago. When you meet Stephen, you would have no idea the battles he has fought. You might not even guess that he has cancer. He's got a smile on his face and talks passionately about fishing. But he's worried. Worries about others in the same boat as him, facing potentially fatally long delays at a DHB that just can't seem to cope. And he's worried that not enough is being done to fix it.
The government they skite about a $7.5 billion surplus. Hell, that's great. That's damn great. But we've got a hospital, a health system falling to bits. Fix it up. Once you've got that running bloody sweet, then skite about whatever surplus you got.
Today, the Health and Disability Commissioner released its inquiry into what's happened, slamming the delays as unacceptable. Stephen also received a letter from the Southern DHB Chief Executive Chris Fleming last month. Part of it reads,
"The level of care you received was unacceptable. We are acutely aware of the failure of Southern DHB during the time of your referral and treatment to provide timely urology services, and we unreservedly apologise that we could not provide you with a reasonable and timely care you required."
Stephen and his family have accepted what's happened and are now making the most of the time they have. But he has some advice for others.
Put the pressure on them. You have to listen to your body. You have to know how bad you are in a certain sense. But if they say that you are going to get an appointment in 2 to 5 weeks' time, like I did, you ring them up on that 2 weeks' time and you ask them, when is my appointment? And if you're not happy with what you get, then you ring them up again. And then if you're not happy, you go in and go to someone's office that you can get a result.
Because had the DHB not made Stephen wait for prostate treatment, perhaps he would not be sitting here today with lung cancer.
Should you have any queries going forward with your treatment, please feel free to contact Service Manager through the service office. So I trust any encounters with Southern DHB services will be more positive in your experience.
And a little earlier, I spoke to the Chief Executive of the Southern DHB, Chris Fleming, and I started by asking him about that written apology to Stephen Hoffman. Did you choose those words yourself?
I signed a letter out, and I stand by the words.
So you didn't write it. Who wrote it?
My team developed the responses, but I take accountability for the words.
Is it a standard apology letter? Did all four of the people you were asked to apologise to get basically the same letter?
Look, I think what we need to focus on is the improvements that we've made, because I'm quite proud of how the team have come forward.
And I really do want to talk about the improvements, but I just want to clear this up straight away. Is this a rote letter? Did they basically get the same apology with their personal circumstances inserted in the beginning of the letter?
Look, the letters are written independently. I would need to go back and double check whether exactly the words are in each letter. But look, I don't think that.
Why put your name to it then? If you haven't been involved in the words, you haven't chosen them. That seems sort of impersonal and maybe rote in terms of an apology.
Because as Chief Executive, I need to take accountability. The organisation, the health system, have let these 4 patients down, and notwithstanding. Indeed, in the HDC's report, the 38 patients that have raised concerns, we've let people down in varying states, and we need to be held to account in terms of what we have done to improve the services moving forward, so that we don't get into the same situation again.
Okay, can you tell me very plainly what the consequences of that substandard care is for Mr. Hoffman? What does it mean for him?
Look, I can't comment on individual clinical circumstances in terms of the care fell below the standard that would be expected. In terms of specific implications on individual patients, that would require a clinical opinion.
So in terms of the report, though, that the Health and Disability Commission has put out, there is a doctor's opinion attached to an ACC claim in relation to Mr. Hoffman, and doctor from your service. So what are they saying about his life expectancy and the way his disease, cancer, was treated as a consequence of the substandard care he received?
The delays could have contributed to deteriorated outcomes. But as I said, I can't comment individually about cases.
What, he's going to die sooner than he would have if you treated him better?
I can't state that.
The doctor's opinion says Mr Hoffman's disease may have been less treatable and probably had reduced his life expectancy.
May have, which is exactly the point. The fundamental issue is we've let him down, and that delay could have impacted the quality of his life. And we have to learn from it. And as I've said, we've apologised. We should have done better. The clinicians had been raising the concerns with management at the time, and for the various reasons that are traversed in the report, actions weren't taken. We needed to improve, and we have.
So how many other people's lives have been shortened by the lack of care that they received from your DHB around this time?
Look, I can't speculate in terms of numbers. We know that there were around 500 patients waiting in August 17, and we need to get that down, and we have.
Isn't that a critical factor, though, to know what the consequences of your actions or lack of action are? So you must have some indication of how many patients have poorer outcomes as a result of a lack of treatment by the Southern DHB.
We have information in terms of those who have raised their concerns with the HDC and the DHB, which are the 38 that are referred to in the report.
So 38 people, how many of them have reduced life expectancy as a result of the care they received from your DHB?
As I have said, we haven't been through an individual case review of every client. What we're focused on is improving the systems.
Don't you want to know?
I want to know that I have improved the system so that we don't get into this situation again. And I'm quite proud of the way the team have pulled together to improve the services overall.
So according to guidelines, where there's high suspicion of cancer, first treatment should be within 62 days of a hospital referral. Mr Hoffman waited 10 months for treatment. Another patient, included in this report, waited more than twice the recommended time frame for treatment. Whose fault is that, and why did it happen?
That is the DHB's accountability, and the contents of the report from the HDC have identified the concerns, the resourcing issues, the facility issues, the lack of standardisation across services, and a number of the areas that we have taken action to address and have reduced the impact quite significantly.
What do you mean by the words DHB's accountability? Could you speak plainly for me, please? What do you mean?
Well, you asked in terms of who needs to take accountability of
whose fault is it? Is what I asked. So
well, it's the organisation's collective responsibility. So that we had placed people in a situation where both clinicians and management alike were unable to take appropriate actions in a timely way.
So that's you, is it? The buck stops with you as the chief executive.
Well, as chief executive, I'm accountable for the overall organisational performance, and hence why we initiated the review and why we've taken specific actions to learn from the experiences to make the wider systems. We've adopted Ministry of Health prioritisation tools to make sure that we're matching referrals in terms of acceptance on the basis of a clinical need. We've put additional resources in. We've improved processes and practices so that, for example, previously you would come into clinic and then we would be sent away to come back to the operating theatre to receive a trust biopsy. Now they are done in clinic on the day you arrive. So we're shortening the times for people to need care.
Okay, so right now, how many patients are waiting outside the recommended times, whether that be for a first specialist appointment, a biopsy or treatment? So how many are outside the recommended times?
Well, in terms of SB2 indicators, which are the patients waiting more than 4 months, there are 5 patients waiting more than 4 months. For those patients who have been seen and who have been identified as needing surgery, there are around about 100 patients waiting longer than the 4 months. However, none of those patients, with the exception of a small number of people who have been delayed for personal reasons or for valid clinical reasons, none of the patients waiting longer than 4 months for surgery are cancer patients. There are a small number, and I'm still trying to get the current number in terms of patients waiting for trust biopsies in terms of SP2. But now that we've also got the new
Some of them, though, do have serious complications, don't they, in waiting? For example, to put it bluntly, some of them can't pee properly.
In terms of the patients that are awaiting, that we have adopted the ministry's criteria for prioritisation, so we are confident that in terms of harm that is caused, like in the situation of the patients that have been reviewed in the HDC report, those types of patients do not exist in that 100.
Okay, so the recommendation is where it's likely that there is cancer, a 62-day treatment time, isn't it, from the referral to hospital?
From the time that the treatment starts. And
exactly. So you are meeting that 62-day treatment time?
There is a small number, which I have been awaiting to get the current number, but it's a very small number.
What is that number?
I'm still waiting. I have been waiting to get the current data.
So how do you know it's a small number if you don't have the data?
Because I have been assured by the service manager that it's a small number, and now that we have the new urologist that commenced with us this month, we are expecting to see that fall further.
Given you knew that this report was on its way, given you knew this report was coming out today, that is a critical question, isn't it?
Yeah, but notwithstanding the fact that in the situation of the events that have been raised, there were patients waiting for these types of procedures, waiting months and months and months. I can assure you that there is no patient waiting for an SP2 for a first specialist assessment longer than 4 months. There's 5 patients in total waiting longer than 4 months.
Yeah, I asked you about the treatment times where cancer is a likely diagnosis, and you've agreed it's 62 days, but you can't tell me how many patients are waiting outside of that time, other than to say you believe it's a small number.
I can't confirm the absolute number, but it is indeed a very small number, and I would be happy to come back to you.
Yeah, because, I mean, that's subjective, what's small and what's not. Wouldn't you agree?
No, not given the circumstances when the situation arose. Patients had been waiting months and months and months. I can categorically say for first specialist assessments, no one other than the 5 patients are waiting longer than 4 months as of today.
What confidence can people have in your service when you think Stephen Hoffman went in with prostate cancer and what came out with kidney cancer and now lung cancer?
Well, what confidence people can have with the service is that when this issue came up, the relationship between management and clinicians were very fractured. The trust and confidence between the two were missing, and I have every confidence that the activities that have taken place, including the service planning, including the additional resourcing, including the implementation of the triaging process, and streamlining the way that patients flow through the service, the relationships and the dynamics are substantially better, and we are monitoring overall volumes on a regular basis.
So are you telling me that conflict between management and clinicians, push and shove and jostling between those two groups, has significantly lowered the life expectancy of some of your patients while you were fighting in-house?
The HDC report itself identifies the issues and the challenges between management and clinicians were contributing to these issues.
So that's a yes then, is it?
Yes.
Because you, two groups of people, couldn't get it together, some people are going to live less well lives and for shorter. That's a high price for them to pay, isn't it?
It is indeed a very high price to pay, and it's not something that was developed overnight. It was something that had been developed over a number of years.
Which begs the question of why it wasn't addressed earlier, because the report from the Commission says that problems go back to, 2014?
Yep. And so when I became aware of the issue in 2016, and we initiated the review. The review did take a period of time to identify the right people to be able to undertake the review. We're very pleased with the people that did drive it, and it was supported out of Urology Associates.
Okay, so we've talked about the review before. I want to go through a list of things, and I want you to give me relatively succinct answers as to whether this has now happened as a consequence. So you were looking to recruit another urologist who was going to work half-time. Have they started yet?
That person started this month, and in the intervening time period, we have utilised locums wherever possible.
So it's taken you over a year to recruit that person?
Absolutely, because there is a shortage of appropriately trained people internationally.
Okay, so do you have a system now, an automated system, that will red flag delayed appointments in some way?
We have systems internally that identify the time frames that people are waiting and where the guidelines are, yes.
But will it, like in the case of Mr Hoffman, where his appointment was not for, 5 months, will that be drawn to your attention ahead of time and you will revisit his case by the system that you now have in place?
That is my understanding.
Just your understanding, you don't know for sure?
Well, no, sorry. I get reporting that shows me the total number of patients waiting, and then there is a lower level of detail, like you've just articulated, about the 31 days and the 62 days, and that reporting is undertaken on a regular basis.
Okay, so concerns were raised at various points about theatre times and there being just 2 surgical lists a week. Has that changed for urology?
Well, look, a couple of things are happening there. Firstly, we have utilised access to private where available, and we are just obviously the redevelopment at Dunedin Hospital continues on, but it's a medium term.
So you have not yet solved that issue of access to theatres.
We have improved access to theatres, and we're about to commission the conversion of an anaesthetic procedure room into an environment that can
how far off is
procedures. That business case is with us at the moment, but needless to say...
So it's coming down to money, is it, then?
No, it's not coming down to money, because remember, at the time of this review being done, there were substantial numbers of people waiting for things like radical prostatectomies that have been waiting for longer than they should have been. There are no patients waiting for that level of surgery at the moment, nor will there be moving forward. Are there patients waiting beyond the timeframes, be it in urology or be it in any other specialty in our organisation? Yes, there are. There is constraints in terms of capacity, but I can't magic up theatre capacity.
Very quickly, before you go, the list of recommendations made by the Health and Disability Commission, they've given you a 3-month time period to report back on these things. Are you going to be able to achieve this?
Look, we have been reporting on a quarterly basis to the Health and Disability Commissioner since the investigation report got underway.
But these recommendations that they've made in today's report?
Yes, we will be able to achieve it.
And that's Chris Fleming, who's the CEO of the Southern DHB. Now, the Southern DHB has got back in touch with those numbers that he wasn't able to provide in the interview. It says the number of people awaiting those biopsies mentioned who have waited longer than the 62-day guideline is currently 10 people. And the Southern DHB says with a new consultant on board now that the team is expected to complete those within the next 3 weeks. And no one among those 10 have been waiting any longer than 3 months. They've been waiting less than 3 months. Now, the Health and Disability Commissioner has recommended that the DHB conducts an independent review of the current system to make sure high-risk patients don't have their appointments delayed, that they audit the management of the urology service and the referrals and follow-up service, that they report on steps to rebuild the department's capacity and responsiveness, and that includes improving staff management relationships and also progress on moving Dunedin urology services to a more appropriate physical space. As mentioned, all of this is supposed to be completed within the next 3 months. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, armed police patrol the streets of Wairoa. The All Blacks prepare for what's been dubbed the real Rugby World Cup final. And is Labour's light rail campaign promise actually going to see the light of day in Auckland? We'd love your feedback, so do get in touch about anything you've heard on the programme. If you're in the Southern DHB catchment, I'm particularly interested in hearing whether you have faith in the services on offer there. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's get to the headlines now with Paul.
Thank you, Lisa. Armed police will patrol the streets of the east coast town of Wairoa after 2 shootings at the weekend. Shots were fired at the home of a police officer in the local police station, and Acting Eastern District Commander Ian Chapman says it's natural to assume the events are linked. He says police have recently ramped up their presence in the town in response to rising gang numbers driven by the methamphetamine trade. And methamphetamine dealers who can prove their own personal addiction played a role in their offending are now eligible for a sentence discount of up to a third. It's one of many changes to meth sentencing options laid out in a Court of Appeal judgment, overhauling previous guidelines. Judges are now also encouraged to consider how a background of poverty and deprivation may impair a person's judgment. The Health and Disability Commissioner says the Southern District Health Board failed patients who spent months waiting for urology services. A report out today says the Health Board breached patient rights by making them wait months for treatment, despite some being labelled urgent. The Southern DHB's head, Chris Fleming, has told Checkpoint apologies have been issued to affected patients, and the focus is now on improving the services. The Transport Agency is warning people not to walk near or over a slip outside Greymouth. It's still on the move. The agency says State Highway 7 access to Greymouth from Stillwater and Kayata will remain off limits while the landslide at Omoto continues to show instability. The Transport Agency says last week's heavy rain triggered an acceleration of the landslide, which has left it with unstable, steep vertical faces. And the Defence Force has been called in to dispose of a chemical that has caused a Dunedin building to be cordoned off this afternoon. Cordons remain in place on McNabb Street in the Dunedin suburb of Kenmure after emergency services were called shortly after 3 o'clock. Fire and Emergency says the chemical amounts to 50 grams, and while it has been identified, no more information is being released. And those are the headlines.
Thanks, Paul. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Time for business now with Nona Peltier. Hey, Nona, exporters are feeling upbeat, are they? Why?
Well, there's a new survey to sort of check out how they're doing, and it turns out they're doing pretty well. They're a lot more upbeat than they were perhaps earlier in the year, and it's hard to say exactly why, but the impact of the US-China trade war has not really taken much of a toll on their, on their business. So, yeah, they're feeling pretty good. Apparently, some more than 60% expect an increase in orders in the coming year.
That's interesting. Now, Tourism Holdings, they are saying, well, they've got a negative one. Full year profit will be down.
Well, they have
What's plaguing them?
They have direct exposure to the US market, which is mixed. Some states are doing well, some not so well. Sales are strong, not so strong in other places. It's a big country, obviously. And so their margins have been squeezed by as much as 40%, and that's on the sale of camper vans, those types of recreational vehicles. So they don't know if there's going to be a turnaround there. It's hard to say right now, but it does mean that they haven't provided any guidance on how their full year is going to turn out. Now, normally they do. Their annual meeting is on Wednesday. They usually provide an update to the market. They're not going to this time. They're saying they could make less money than last year. Last year they made $27.9 million net profit. Could be less this year. And the market certainly reacted to that.
Yeah, let's take a twirl around the market.
Yeah, exactly. So the share price fell 11% to $3.70. I think that's 44 cents, as a matter of fact. And in any case, overall, though, with all the turmoil out there, the uncertainty, could be a trade deal in the wind, US-China, we don't know. We've heard again that there's more positive news out of those negotiations. At the same time, Brexit is a big question mark. So one thing sort of tends to overshadow the other. Our index was little changed. Our NZX Top 50 index was down just 4 points, and it had been about even steady through most of the afternoon. 11,063 is the closing number there. And the currency, steady at 64 US cents, so even slightly higher than it was on Friday. Yeah. 93.3 Australian, which is exactly where it was at, and 49.6.
Oh, we're still under the 50 mark.
We're still under, but who knows? Watch this space.
Yeah, and Brexit. Yeah, exactly. The train wreck rolls on. Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with our business wrap. Armed police are on patrol in Wairoa after the police were targeted in 2 shootings. A shotgun was fired at the front door of an officer's house at about 11 o'clock on Saturday night, followed by more shots outside the Wairoa police station on Sunday evening. Anusha Bradley reports.
The police are on high alert in Wairoa after one of their own was the target of a shooting on Saturday night. An officer was at home with their family when somebody fired a shotgun at their front door. The next night, shots were fired at the front of Wairoa police station. Nobody was injured in either shooting. Acting Eastern District Commander Ian Chapman says it's fortunate no one was hurt, but no officer should be targeted, let alone at their home.
They were home, so there were people home, but by sheer luck no one was hurt. This could have had a very tragic outcome, and as I say, our staff do not deserve to be subject to this sort of attack given the community that they live in.
As a result of the shootings, the police have assembled an armed response team which will patrol the town until further notice. Members of the Armed Offenders Squad will be armed with Glock pistols, ready for any high-risk call-out they may have to attend. Mr Chapman says they're in the spirit of new armed teams that will be patrolling in Auckland, Waikato and Canterbury from later this month. The Mayor of Wairoa, Craig Little, says he wants the shooters to be locked up and for criminals to be driven out of town.
My God, what a cowardly act. You know, just if anyone thinks they're tough doing this sort of stuff, then again, you know, I just hope that anybody who knows who the perpetrators are, that they just dob them straight in, because why would you look after people like this? They could have, you know, there's family involved, and they when they shot, they don't know what's behind the walls, so it's just disgusting.
Mr Little says the police are simply doing their job.
The police are doing what we want them to do. You know, they're looking after the public of New Zealand and doing it well in Wairoa, and this is what they get, and it's really disappointing, and I really feel sorry for the police and the families involved.
Craig Little says despite what they went through, the police officer and their family are feeling positive, both about the incident and living in Wairoa. That was echoed by Ian Chapman. He says about 30 staff members and their families turned out for a meeting this morning to discuss the shootings.
What it showed to me was just how connected the people are of Wairoa. It's so much more than just police. They are part of the community. And as a result of being part of it, you absolutely deserve to feel safe.
Mr Chapman says the police are deciding whether it's safe for the officer involved to remain in Wairoa.
They're absolutely committed to the communities of Wairoa, making sure that everyone is safe and feels safe. The police officer concerned is very, very committed to continuing to serve the community of Wairoa. As we go about the investigation, we'll make a determination as to their safety.
Residents of Wairoa have showed backing for the police, saying the shooting should never have happened.
It's kind of exactly what you expect idiots to do. They literally shot at themselves because now the cops are going to actually pay more attention to them. So.
Oh, it's shocking, isn't it? I used to work for the police. The problem here is the P. That's the problem. Shouldn't happen. Not with kids. You know, they want to take a pot shot at the guy, that's fair enough, but not kids and wife, it's wrong.
Ian Chapman has urged residents to call if they have information about the shooting. In Wairoa for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
The semi-finalists have been found at the Rugby World Cup in Japan, but most people think the All Blacks clash with England will in essence be the final. Wales and the Springboks round out the last four, but neither were impressive in the way they reached the semi-finals. Rugby reporter Joe Porter is in Tokyo.
South Africa were the last team to qualify for the final four, ending the fairy tale run of host Japan with a 26-3 win in Tokyo. The Boks were bruising on defence but offered very little on attack, and coach Rassie Erasmus knows they'll need to be more consistent to push further into the tournament.
Don't get soft moments away. I think that's when we will have a real chance. I think we do have the pack. I think we do have the backline players to go all the way. But I think in a game which is 80 minutes, and let's say if you have 4 or 5 minutes where you drop your concentration, which we did against New Zealand, you get found out.
Erasmus talks about the All Blacks, who they could meet in the final, but they'll have to get past Wales first in Yokohama on Sunday.
They are definitely a team with a lot of X factor. They've got a great coaching staff, and they've created depth in every single position. And yeah, I think they've got good confidence, great team spirit, and big challenge for us.
Wales were even less convincing than South Africa. They needed a red card to the opposition and a last-gasp try to get past a French team who had largely been a rabble before last night's quarter-final. Coach Warren Gatland concedes they got lucky in Oita.
I think the better team lost today, so but that red card was obviously significant. And the thing about our boys is the great thing is that they don't give up. They just keep trying to the end.
Trying is one thing, but winning is another, and Gatland says they'll have to lift their standards significantly if they're to be a title threat.
We need to go away and have a look at some critical areas, just the way that teams have been quite effective in playing against us and getting a bit of success, so we need to address that. But you're in a semi-final of the World Cup and it's 240 minutes to do something for the rest of your life, so we're down to 160 now.
It's hard to see either the Springboks or Wales reaching the levels the All Blacks and England have, with the victor in Saturday's clash in Yokohama expected to go on and win the whole thing. The England coach Eddie Jones is as confident as ever after crushing the Wallabies in their quarter-final, but he knows the All Blacks are a different beast, and he's asking his players to find an even sharper edge for the semi-final.
The best samurais were always the guys who had a plan but they could adapt. They had a calm head but they were full of aggression. And I thought we were pretty much like that. But again, the challenge is how we get better, because there's always a better samurai around the corner.
The All Blacks were equally, if not more impressive in their dismantling of Ireland, and coach Steve Hansen says if they play to the best of their ability, they have a pretty good shot at winning. He says the challenge will be to stop his players from tightening up when the pressure comes on.
We know they're going to be tough. You don't win 18 test matches in a row without being a good team, and the team that did that is basically the team he's got here. So they're playing good footy, so they'll be confident, as we will be, playing well ourselves, and we just got to make sure as a coaching group and management group we create an environment where these guys can really express themselves come Saturday.
If both teams can do that, it should make for one hell of a test match. In Tokyo, mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Joe Porter aho.
It's 6:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Start working on your predictions there. The All Blacks versus England. Let us know your thoughts. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. An inquest into the death of a young man in a police cell has heard he may have survived if a detox centre was available at the time. 21-year-old Century Taitoko was high on drugs and displaying erratic behaviour when he was placed inside a suicide prevention cell at County's Manukau Police Station in 2014. He later died after hitting his head dozens of times against the floor and walls. Katie Scotcher reports.
In the sleepless days leading up to his death, 21-year-old Century Taitoko consumed a cocktail of methamphetamine, alcohol and LSD. On the evening of February the 22nd, 2014, after having what's described as a bad trip, Mr Taitoko was arrested for breaching the peace. He was taken to the county's Manukau police station and placed in a suicide prevention cell, which had no furniture and operating CCTV cameras. Today, a coronial inquest heard Mr Taitoko through his body around the cell, hitting the floor and walls. He was monitored by officers and briefly a doctor throughout the night, both in person and on CCTV cameras. Coroner Deborah Bell said the CCTV cameras in the cell later switched off as Mr Taitoko had settled down and appeared to go to sleep.
At 4:26 a.m. on the morning of 23 February 2014, Mr Taitoko's camera in his cell stopped recording. He was subsequently checked and was found to have breathing difficulties. An ambulance was called, but unfortunately Mr Taitoko could not be resuscitated.
Former Sergeant Grant Turvey said there was a steady stream of prisoners on the night Mr Taitoko was taken to the station. He told the inquest Mr Taitoko was carried in horizontally by two officers who were struggling to control him. Mr Turvey said he was then placed inside a cell where he would be frequently monitored.
Mr Taitoko was out of control with his behaviour. In all of my policing career, I had never seen anyone behave like this before. It was like he was bouncing off the walls. He was doing it numerous times. He would hit his head on the wall, fall over, hit his head on the floor, then get up and start over again. To me, it looked like he was hitting his head quite hard.
Mr Turvey said a doctor, who has interim name suppression, had come to the station to assess another prisoner, but was also asked to look at Century Taitoko. He told the inquest the doctor went to assess Mr Taitoko, but couldn't as his behaviour was extreme. It was then he noticed redness on his forehead and a graze on the back of his head.
Doctor commented on the redness, so I knew he was aware of it.
Mr Turvey said it had earlier been agreed Mr Taitoko couldn't be taken to hospital and would be assessed by a doctor before release. He said the doctor was satisfied with this and left the station. But not long after, Mr Turvey said during a visual check of Mr Taitoko, an officer noticed some blood on the mattress he was lying on. Upon closer inspection, officers noticed a pool of blood beneath his head and his breath was short and gargled. Mr Turvey said paramedics were called and officers attempted CPR, but Mr Taitoko died a short time later. The officer in charge of the police's investigation into the death, Detective Senior Sergeant Ross Elwood, earlier told the inquest Mr Taitoko was put in the cell as there was nowhere else he could go.
I think when it comes to a choice between leaving someone to sleep it off in their own bed or to being somewhere where they can be regularly monitored, you know, I'd personally want to have someone being monitored and checked on.
He said in 2014, hospitals wouldn't admit someone in Mr Taitoko's condition.
Due to the fact that he was aggressive and violent and quite severely intoxicated, so therefore difficult to manage.
Sergeant Elwood said if there were dedicated detoxification centres, the level of care would be very different.
If you had a detoxification centre, there would be the health aspect to it. Police cells are intended for housing prisoners, not intended as a health complex.
The 5-day inquest will resume at the Auckland District Court tomorrow. I tamaki makaurau mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scott Churaho.
The Deputy Prime Minister says he'll be keeping a close eye on the price tag for light rail in Auckland after being alerted to potential cost blowouts by an industry source. The Transport Minister is defending delays to the project, which would eventually see light rail to the airport, saying a second bid from the Superannuation Fund and its Canadian partner is worth examining thoroughly. But it denies that is going to lead to a cost blowout for the multi-billion-dollar project. And the opposition leader, Simon Bridges, has lashed out at the Superannuation Fund, accusing it of a cynical conduct by going unsolicited to the government with its alternative proposal. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The promise to build light rail from downtown Auckland to the airport within a decade was made by Jacinda Ardern in her first policy announcement and campaign rally as party leader ahead of the 2017 general election. An agreement for work to begin on light rail from the city to the airport in Auckland this term was also part of Labour's confidence and supply deal with the Greens. The Transport Ministry is now considering two proposals, one from the New Zealand Transport Agency and the other from NZ Infra, a joint venture by the Super Fund and the Canada Infrastructure Bank. The Minister Phil Twyford says the project is still at the business case stage.
The original cost estimate from the preliminary work that was done was approximately $4 billion for the city centre to Mangere light rail line. As I said, work's still going on that. I've received no advice about cost blowouts or cost increases or anything.
The Deputy Prime Minister and New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters says he's been warned about possible budget blowouts, not from ministerial colleagues, but a credible industry source.
Well, I'll be honest with you and say, have I had cause to say, prick up your ears and try and listen and find out? Yes, I have been told.
About cost potential?
No,
potential costs?
To be on the alert for costs.
Jacinda Ardern says light rail is something New Zealand's largest city needs.
Auckland is congested, it is losing productivity, it is losing its potential reputation to be a world-class city if we do not have decent public transport infrastructure. My view is that Aucklanders support a rail to the airport option, and it's our job to get on with developing it.
The National Party leader Simon Bridges, though, says the costs are going to be significant and for several years.
We've got a tram here that's a slow-moving economic train wreck for New Zealanders. When the Prime Minister first talked about a tram to Roskilde, it was about a $1.5 billion project. Now the talk is, and Shane Jones, Associate Minister of Transport, Minister of Infrastructure, is talking about $6 to $8 billion.
And he's scathing about how the Superfund partnership, NZ Infra, has conducted itself. The process has been appalling, he says, as there should have first been a business case, then a competitive tender, then finally the contract awarded.
A Superfund, I think, very cynically has tried to short-circuit that process, and unfortunately it seems like there's people stupid enough within the Beehive and the Ministry of Transport and Transport Agency to entertain that.
The Minister, Phil Twyford, says there will be a delay while the second proposal is investigated, a delay for which he makes no apology.
There won't be shovels in the ground before the election, and that's because we made a very deliberate and informed decision to give the super fund proposal serious consideration, because it is such a promising option to deliver a generational multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project that will go a long way to setting Auckland up to have a 21st century transport system.
Mr Twyford says Cabinet will make a decision in April about whether NZTA or NZ Infra would be given the nod. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
And the Super Fund has got back to us saying NZ Infra is in a competitive process with regard to our proposal to develop light rail in Auckland. We are focused on putting forward a quality proposal that meets the government's objectives for delivering rapid transport in Auckland. As such, we're not in a position to comment on this. To the UK now, and the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson will attempt to conduct a second vote on his latest Brexit deal in the House of Commons, despite losing a similar vote yesterday. It's the latest move in an increasingly desperate strategy to have Brexit signed off by October 31st. Over the weekend, Mr Johnson was forced to ask the EU for an extension to the UK's October 31st exit date, after MPs backed a move to delay approval of the deal. Now he's hoping for a change of mind in the Commons as the clock ticks down. The BBC's John Pinar reports.
They don't seem to know when they're beaten, even when they've been defeated. Senior ministers marched into TV studios today with a defiant message. They'll deliver Brexit on time by October the 31st, and being forced to send a request to Brussels seeking another Brexit delay wouldn't stop them.
Above all, the game changer this week, which we've hardly talked about at all, is that he's defied the doubters, got a deal, and we also now, notwithstanding the shenanigans in Parliament, appear to have now the numbers to get this through. The only question is, why aren't we getting on with it?
The ayes to the right, 322. The noes to the left, 306.
What he called parliamentary shenanigans, others called an embarrassing defeat yesterday. That vote forced the Prime Minister to send a letter to Brussels seeking to extend Brexit for as long as it takes to pass his deal into law and avoid a no-deal exit on October the 31st. The PM didn't like it and didn't sign it. His opponents aren't impressed.
The law is very clear. He should have signed one letter in accordance with the law. He's being childlike.
Tomorrow, the Speaker, John Bercow, will decide whether ministers can try again to win the vote they lost yesterday. But either way, this week, the Commons will debate the detailed legislation that's also needed to pass a deal. Now, Labour looks like pushing for another Brexit referendum.
We need an amendment to say that whatever deal gets through, it should be subject to a referendum where that deal is put to the public and they're asked, do you want to leave on these terms, or would you rather remain in the EU? So next week's going to be busy.
Today, the Minister for Brexit Preparations chaired a planning session, and he conceded extending Brexit, or refusing to, was up to the EU.
It means that we're triggering Operation Yellowhammer. It means that we are preparing to ensure that if no extension is granted, and we cannot guarantee that an extension will be granted, that we have done everything possible in order to prepare to leave without a deal.
The architect of the government's defeat yesterday, the MP who drew up the request to extend, can't see the EU saying no.
My own gut instinct has been all the way along that if we got to the end and we were going to crash out otherwise, and we'd made a request for an extension, very probably the EU would say, have an extension.
EU leaders are now watching to see how the political struggle at Westminster plays out. They want Brexit settled, like everyone else, but they'll just have to wait, like the rest of us.
John Pinar at Westminster. Time for some of your feedback now on our earlier interview with the boss of the Southern DHB, Chris Fleming. A lot of you getting in touch about the report on their urology services. This person says, or Sam from Auckland says, what a train wreck of an interview in terms of responses from the Southern DHB CEO, Chris Fleming. How is he still in this job? Similar issues to the colonoscopy delays and communication breakdown features again. People in Southland deserve much better from their health service. Beth from Invercargill says Mr Fleming's tone of voice, words he chooses to say and not say, he seems to lack compassion, empathy or basic love for people. Sack him, says Beth. Someone else has got in touch to say weasel words from the Southern DHB. What utter idiocy. Gordon says, come on Lisa, you've known for years that management versus clinicians fights means lower quality service for clients, and in hospitals that means shorter life expectancies. That's not news, says Gordon. Actually, the report said that normalised delays, i.e. acceptance of the delays by various people, meant that no one was advocating for the patients, Gordon. And this from Mike in Dunedin says, I live in Dunedin and was appalled by Chris Fleming's bumbling jargon-laden and facile interview. I have no faith in him, as I don't think he cares about people. Hopefully, the DHB will sack him and appoint a clinical leader who can deliver. Another person says they're tired of hearing post hoc apologists for our substandard health services. We need to make them liable in a court of law. That is, Kiwis should have the right to litigate against individuals, health boards and ultimately the government, they say, for non-performance of their social contract with individual New Zealanders.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. The Southern DHB has apologised following an investigation which found the Health Board breached patient rights on 4 occasions. The Health and Disability Commissioner found the District Health Board failed patients who waited months for urology services, including some labelled as urgent. An apology and 4 letters have been sent to patients whose lives were put at risk due to the DHB's failing. But the Southern DHB Chief Executive Chris Fleming admitted to not writing the letters himself and says a team did that for him. Mr Fleming has told Checkpoint the lack of care was unacceptable.
The health system have let these 4 patients down, and notwithstanding, indeed, in the HDC's report, the 38 patients that have raised concerns, we've let people down in varying states, and we need to be held to account.
Chris Fleming says they've since introduced better processes across the DHB to prevent unmanageable waiting lists developing in the future. Police say they had already ramped up their presence in Wairoa before the weekend's violence. A shotgun was fired through the front door of an officer's house on Saturday night, and then the police station was fired at yesterday evening. Catherine Hutton reports.
Acting Eastern District Commander Ian Chapman says it's natural to assume the events are linked. He says in recent months the police have increased their presence in the town in response to rising gang numbers driven by the methamphetamine trade. In June, Operation Rugby launched, which brought police, local leaders, iwi and gang leaders together to address the behaviour of a few individuals. The town's police station also opened around the clock. Mr Chapman says the weekend's events were caused by 1 or 2 individuals who have gone too far. An armed response team is patrolling the town 24 hours a day until further notice, armed with Glock pistols and driving armoured vehicles. This is Catherine Hutton.
Methamphetamine dealers whose own addiction caused their offending can now receive a sentence discount of up to a third. It's one of several changes to meth sentencing options announced today in a Court of Appeal judgment. Katie Doyle reports.
Judges must also now consider if an offender's background of poverty and deprivation has impaired their choices or diminished moral responsibility. This can potentially result from loss of land, language, culture, rangatiratanga, mana and dignity. Ross Bell from the Drug Foundation says it's good to see the court has finally acknowledged that methamphetamine offending doesn't happen in a vacuum. He says the judgment reflects the fact that people are starting to view meth offending as a health issue first and foremost. Mr Bell says today's changes are a building block towards a much more health-focused approach to drug offending. Ko Katie Doyle, TNA.
The contentious methane reduction target in the Zero Carbon Bill remains unscathed in the Environment Committee's final report. Only minor changes have been made to the bill following Public Select Committee submissions. The bill will create a legally binding objective to limit global warming. The National Party has previously criticised the target of lowering animal and plant methane levels by 24 to 47% against the advice of the Climate Change Chief Executive's Board. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the range is based off international evidence.
What we're acknowledging is that it is a changing environment. That's why, of course, the Climate Commission has the ability to keep assessing where New Zealand will be within that evidence base.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. The Deputy Prime Minister says any politician should be alert to transport project blowouts, and he'll be keeping a close eye on the costs of light rail in Auckland in particular. The Transport Minister is defending delays as a highly compelling alternative proposal is investigated, but says he's not expecting a budget blowout. Two proposals are on the table, one from the Transport Agency and the other from a super fund joint venture. Winston Peters says he's been warned about possible blowouts, not from ministerial colleagues, but a credible industry source.
Well, I'll be honest with you and say, have I had cause to say, prick up your ears and try and listen and find out? Yes, I have been told.
Winston Peters, Nationals leader, has criticised the potential cost and also the conduct of the super fund for cynically using the back door to get its proposal before the government. It's coming up to 4 minutes past 6. On to sport now. The All Blacks have heaped praise on host nation Japan after their dream run at the Rugby World Cup came to an end. The Brave Blossoms were beaten 26-3 by South Africa in last night's quarter-final in Tokyo. It was the first time the Japanese had reached the knockout stage of a World Cup, and they did so by beating Ireland and Scotland in group play. All Blacks forward Brodie Retallick says Japan deserved to be called a Tier 1 nation.
We watched the whole game. The speed and the skill that they did it with was pretty awesome. They're sixth in the world right now, and it feels like they've got a country in behind the game of rugby. And that's what we're all here to do, is inspire people and hopefully people to take up and participate in the game of rugby. So, job well done to them.
Brodie Retallick. Benji Marshall admits he had some hesitation in accepting the New Zealand Rugby League Test captaincy for what will be a record 20th time when he leads the side against Australia in Wollongong on Friday night. The Test will be Marshall's 29th, and he will have been captain for all but 9 of them, overtaking halfback Gary Freeman for most Tests as New Zealand skipper. Marshall only ended a 7-year absence from the international scene when he played in the Kiwis' win over Tonga in Auckland earlier this year.
Crazy story, to be honest. Something I definitely didn't see coming, but at the same time, something I reckon I can look back on and be really proud of. Yeah, just the ability to get back in this position to play, but then also to be able to lead our country again. When I did it the last time, I was a lot younger and didn't understand as much as I do now about leadership, and I know this time I definitely can make the most of it.
Benji Marshall, and that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Dana Johansson offers her thoughts on the Silver Ferns netball series against the old rivals Australia. And former Sugar Cube, Sigtryggur Baldursson, explains why Iceland is offering to pay for a quarter of a band's travel and accommodation if it records its album in Reykjavik, or another town even harder to pronounce. I mean, don't they have enough great bands in Iceland already? Find out on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service through to midnight tomorrow, Tuesday, for Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Mostly fine, isolated showers mainly about the ranges. For the rest of the North Island, cloudy periods with a few showers, possibly heavy from Waitomo southwards tomorrow evening. Marlborough and Nelson, cloudy periods with isolated showers mainly about the ranges. However, showers becoming widespread tomorrow evening. Bulla and Westland, periods of rain or showers with isolated thunderstorms possible tomorrow. Fiordland, Southland and Clutha, showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow. Canterbury and Otago, excluding Clutha, scattered showers, some heavy, possibly thundery with hail about now and into the evening. Rain spreading north from tomorrow afternoon, possibly heavy for a time, falling as snow above 400 metres. At the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with a few showers, rain for a time tomorrow. Just after 6:06.
Thanks, Paul. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A Southland man whose life has likely been cut short due to lengthy delays in receiving cancer treatment is demanding better access to healthcare for Southern patients. The Health and Disability Commissioner released a report today on urology services at the Southern DHB after receiving 38 complaints since the beginning of 2016. The report, which looked at the treatment of 4 patients, found unacceptable delays in assessment and treatment, which resulted in substantial clinical risk. The DHB has been forced to apologise to the 4 patients. One of them is Stephen Hoffman, who waited 10 months for treatment, which should have only taken weeks. He's now developed secondary cancer and it's terminal. Stephen Hoffman sat down with our South Island reporter Logan Church at his home in Gore to recall the moment his life changed forever.
It was actually my wife's birthday. My doctor puts together a referral for me, enlarged, hard, prostrate, high suspicion of cancer. So that goes in and it gets triaged in the hospital, triaged semi-urgent within 6 weeks to be seen. And we received a letter a few days later telling us this, but at there was a sentence below it that actually said, currently the estimated wait time for your appointment is 12 weeks. So we immediately think 13 weeks because we knew what was going on. And it's just normal. It was normal for people to think that they weren't going to be seen on time, things like that. So anyway, along with a couple of strikes in the hospital system, 2 24-hour strikes, junior doctors, it got close to Christmas, and I just said to my wife, I said, well, I'm not going to get seen this year, so consequently it rolled into next year. And so we ended up, we got an appointment, and on the 20th of February we have this appointment. And basically the hospital says, after I got triagged, I got lost in the system. 5 months had gone by. Should have been seen and done in 61 days. The surgeon, he said to me, if he'd known about it, you would have been seen, all done in 61 days. That would have probably meant that I wouldn't have needed any radiation, chemo, gone through all that, and I would have been ready for work at the start of 2017, and I would have been out in the workforce making money for the country as a taxpayer. As it is, I'll never work again. I sit here now, I'll never be able to work again.
And what was your quality of life like during that 10-month period?
Oh, well, no, it wasn't that good. I mean, up until I got seen on the 20th of February, I had really bad problems. They were feeding me different pills to make me pee and everything. And then he shoved that in me, and they drained out quite a bit of fluid out of me that was retained in retention, which can cause infection, which luckily it didn't happen to me, but I'm sure there's people out there that they're holding back on working on that are in that situation. So I'd been driving a log truck. On that day, on the 20th of February, they stuck a catheter in me, so for the next 19 weeks I drove that log truck with this blooming catheter in me, and it actually was quite funny. A couple of times I pinched that bag and there was bloody stuff running everywhere, and I'm telling the guys to get out of the road on the skid site, and turned it into a bit of a laugh.
So what happens after that? You also developed secondary cancer, though, during this time, didn't you? Yeah,
well, the family wanted to go on a bit of a trip. They're going to go on it, I'm not going now, because I really couldn't answer the insurance questions properly, so I asked for a CT scan, which was actually 7 months ahead of a routine one I was going to get. So I'm lucky in that way. But so the result came back. I was just expecting to be able to fill out the questions for the insurance, but the result came back. They said, he called me in and said, right, you've got cancer in your lungs now. And I go, oh God. So I will need chemo one day when I'm older and not as strong to fight it. So that's basically where I'm at. Yeah.
What role do you think the government has in fixing some of these problems?
Well, for a starter, I want to call them to task. I mean, the government they skite about a $7.5 billion surplus. Hell, that's great. That's damn great. But we've got a hospital, a health system falling to bits. Fix it up. Once you've got that running bloody sweet, then skite about whatever surplus you got.
Because what's the impact of not doing that?
Well,
both on people, but also...
Well, once again, come back to me as the example. If I was fixed up straight away, it wouldn't have cost near as much. Just do the job. Doesn't cost much. And then I go out in the workforce and I make a lot of money for the country and myself. But, so, that's about it. It's to get your workforce fit and healthy to work as best you can. And the only way, the cheapest way to do that, when someone presents themselves to you, is do it now, before it festers into something worse.
And that's Stephen Hoffman there talking to our South Island reporter Logan Church. And the Health Minister, David Clark, declined to be interviewed about the Health and Disability Commissioner's report. But in a statement, he says he's well aware of the distress and, quote, health loss that can result when people wait too long for appropriate treatment. David Clark says he expects the Southern DHB will address the issues identified in the report, which first emerged under the previous national government as a matter of priority. He says he's been told the DHB has made good progress reducing waiting times for urology first specialist assessment, but it has more work to do to ensure all patients who need surgery receive it in a timely fashion. It is almost 14 minutes after 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The All Blacks dispatched Ireland at the Rugby World Cup quarter-finals on the weekend and are already preparing for an even bigger semi-final against England on Saturday. With only one day off to recover, the team have today hit the gym and gone through a raft of meetings as they plot for a place in a third straight World Cup title decider. Lock Brodie Retallick and flanker Sam Cane have just spoken to the media in Tokyo, and Cane says he's feeling fresh ahead of the clash as he made his case for another starting jersey.
Everyone wants to be playing. I was stoked to start first and foremost, and happy with the first 40 minutes I put out. Big games, a tournament like this, you want to play as much as you can, but you realise it's a team sport, and the coaches are making decisions based on what is best for our team to get the job done. Positive for me is I'm feeling a little bit fresher than maybe some of the boys who played a bit longer, so I'm in a good space.
Sam Cane. And the talk about rivalry between the All Blacks and England has also started, and Brodie Retallick says he loves taking on the English, who dominated the Wallabies in their quarter-final. But he says he's taking his inspiration from the Japanese players who bowed out in a spirited match between the host nation and South Africa last night in their first ever quarter-final.
We know they're always physical. They've got a big forward pack. Well with good skill sets. And likewise their backs, they play a pretty expensive game. I've only seen a little bit of what they did against Australia, but they've got great skill sets and attack with a lot of variations, so that's where we're going to have to be on our game.
Brodie Retallick there, and Clay Wilson joins us from Tokyo. Clay, what else were Sam Cane and Brodie Retallick saying about the week that lies ahead?
Kia ora, Lisa. Yeah, both obviously very experienced players, Brodie Retallick and Sam Cane. So they were pretty relaxed today as they're about 5 or 6 days out from this semi-final. They've both, of course, also been here before. They were both part of that winning team in 2015, so they know what it's like to be building up to a World Cup semi-final. The other thing that was interesting they were talking about was their experiences against England. Now, Brodie Retallick's played England a number of times. He spoke about the brutality, the physical nature, as he touched on in that grab there. Sam Cane, though, has never played England. 66 test matches, and of course he's had his injury troubles, and that's meant throughout his career he hasn't had a chance to play England. So he doesn't really know what it's like, but he's obviously looking forward to it in a big game with the semi-final.
Some people are saying, some commentators are saying that the All Blacks England game is essentially the final. Is that a little bit arrogant, or is that the feeling there?
No, that's definitely the feeling here as well. Of course, we saw how brilliant the All Blacks were in their quarter-final against Ireland at their skillful and physical best, and really we haven't seen a performance that complete from the All Blacks for a long time. And then, of course, England dominating Australia defensively, really outstanding, and also just clinical when they got their opportunities, they took them. The other semi-final is going to be Wales against South Africa, and we saw both those semi-finals yesterday. Wales had to come from behind against France with 14 men, a very scratchy win for Wales, and then South Africa, of course, struggling against Japan in the first half, a few nerves at half time, but then eventually managed to come into the second half. The kicking game took over, so they were clinical but not very inspiring. So it does look like to a lot of our pundits that the winner of this New Zealand-England semi-final could likely be the winner of the World Cup.
So you've got Steve Hansen and his English counterpart, Eddie Jones. They're both talking up the chances of the other's team and also the other coach. So what do we make of that? Is that just a bit of pre-game psychology, trying to make the other ones think that they are, that they're the favoured team?
Yeah, this has been one of the interesting things that people have noted here to come out of the last couple of days. Both Steve Hansen and Eddie Jones lavishing praise on each other and each other's teams. We heard Steve Hansen say Eddie Jones is a fantastic coach and the England team has a harder edge about it with Jones in charge. And then we heard Eddie Jones go as far as to say the All Blacks are the greatest team there's ever been in sport. So obviously high praise. Brodie Retallick wasn't buying into that Eddie Jones comment too much when he was asked about it today, but both these coaches have been known for a little bit of gamesmanship, so there does seem to be a friendship and a respect there, but also I guess a potential that there is a little bit of gamesmanship trying to get in the heads of the other coaches, the other teams, ahead of what is such a crunch match.
A potential spoiler alert, Clay. There are apparently typhoons near Japan, more of them. Is there any suggestion that this is going to disrupt the semis?
No, not at this stage. There's 2 typhoons in the Western Pacific at the moment. Only one of them, Naguri, is expected to hit Japan, but it's not expected to be anywhere near on the scale as Hagibis was. So we should be fine. It's expected to bring a lot of rainfall. So for those rural areas, the outlying areas in Japan that have already been pretty hard hit by this, the first typhoon, not great news for them, but in terms of the rugby, shouldn't affect the semi-finals too much, if at all.
Thanks, Clay. That's Clay Wilson joining us live from Tokyo. To the UK now, and Prince Harry has suggested he could move to Africa with his wife Meghan and their son Archie. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex spoke out to ITV for a documentary looking behind the scenes of their 10-day royal tour of Africa that they made with their baby Archie. The 35-year-old Duke reveals his desire to leave the UK and make a life for him, his wife and their 5-month-old boy in the place where their lives and lives' work is focused on. Harry also acknowledges there had been deepening tensions between himself and William following months of speculation about the state of the brothers' relationship. The Duchess of Sussex, meanwhile, admits she was naive about the British tabloid press, saying she was warned by friends that they will destroy your life. I asked Richard Palmer, the royal correspondent for the Daily Express in the UK, what he makes of the documentary.
It's a great watch. It's very well worth watching, and it does give you a real insight into how the couple are feeling at the moment. You know, Harry and Meghan actually both looked as if they were really struggling to cope with the pressures of being in the public spotlight as members of the royal family. And I think Harry in the past has said that at various times he's thought about quitting, and you can see it happening, really.
Well, one of the revelations, arguably, was this idea that potentially they could decamp to Africa. Is that realistic? Could it happen?
People who work for them have insisted, certainly up until now, that they've only ever discussed them perhaps going out to be based in Africa for 2 or 3 months at a time. The argument was that they could base themselves in Cape Town or Johannesburg and do cover 4 or 5 different countries whilst living in one place with Archie. But I think Harry certainly seems to be talking about something different, which is about actually living abroad for a long time. And personally, I think it's a fantasy of his. I mean, he says himself in the documentary that he's been going to, Botswana for about 15 years, and he says himself it's escapism. That he likes the fact that a lot of people out there don't really know who he is. But against that, he does say in the documentary that there are practical difficulties with it. And one of the things he didn't say, but people close to him have said, is that there is a problem in trying to persuade the British government and the British taxpayer to pay for a team of Scotland Yard detectives to be living permanently out in Africa.
Did these interviews shed any light on whether there is actually a rift between the brothers, William and Harry?
He was directly asked that question. Tom Bradby, the presenter, said that there have been lots of reports in the press about a rift, and asked how true they were. And Harry could easily have said, well, they're not true, there is no rift, but he didn't. he talked about, I think, inevitably, stuff happens. We're certainly on different paths at the moment. But then he qualified that and said, but I'll always be there for him, as I know he'll always be there for me. Said they didn't see each other as much as they used to because they're so busy. Said the majority of stuff is created out of nothing. I don't know whether he meant press stories about rifts or whether he meant their disputes come out of nothing.
So why did they...
As brothers, you have good days, you have bad days. So, I think most of the British media, including ITV News, have taken that as confirmation that there are problems between the brothers.
So why did they do the documentary? If you're concerned about getting smashed in the tabloid newspapers, why do this? What is the motivation, do you think?
Well, I think they've been itching to get their story across to the public. Tom Bradby is an old friend of Harry and William's, and he's done 3 documentaries now, I think, with Harry. So he was a good vehicle to use. It's a good question. I'm not convinced that it's going to change people's minds, that people have got fairly entrenched views about this now. A lot of us in the British press have come to believe that Harry and Meghan have lost Middle England, as we call it, that people who used to really like Harry and think he was a great asset for the country are now not so sure, and they're not so sure about Meghan. I think, Harry... I think it's a great shame because I think they've both got so much they can contribute for Britain and for the Commonwealth. They are helping the monarchy to reach people who have previously felt untouched by the royal family. And that's got to be a really good thing for Britain and for the Commonwealth and for the monarchy. And so I think Meghan in particular, has been taken up as a standard bearer by people of colour. Harry, he has his charm. He wears his heart on his sleeve, and he's achieved great things with the Invictus Games and the charity that he set up, Centabale in Africa. But he's used up a lot of that goodwill in the last couple of years. And I have to say, he looks like a damaged person at the moment. Royal sources are confirming that they are both going to take a bit of time out. They're going to take about 6 weeks off and divide that between spending some time off in Britain and in the US. And it looks like they really need that because they both look a bit damaged by this whole process.
Was there any sense from Meghan Markle that she regrets joining the royal family?
Well, I suppose there was really. She talked about how her British friends warned her that, basically warned her not to marry Harry. So, I don't think she was saying she regretted marrying Harry, but she was suggesting that things can't go on like this, and dropping a fairly big hint that if they do continue as they are, then they need to think about doing something different in life. What she said was, I've said for a long time to H, that's what I call him, it's not enough to just survive something, right? That's not the point of life. You've got to thrive, you've got to feel happy. She talked about trying to adopt the British sensibility of a stiff upper lip, but she hasn't really managed to do that. And they're bearing their hearts and souls, I suppose, to the public, hoping that maybe it will change behaviour. I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure it will.
And that's Richard Palmer, the royal correspondent for the Daily Express in the UK. Hong Kong has once again erupted into violence, with tens of thousands of people taking part in illegal protests over the weekend. While police fired tear gas and water cannon into the crowds, some protesters threw petrol bombs and trashed businesses. It's a sign that this movement, which has now been going for close to 5 months, isn't going away. The ABC's Julia Holman reports.
It's been 2 weeks of relative calm in Hong Kong, but that all changed over the weekend. Tens of thousands took part in an anti-government rally that authorities forbid, and it quickly turned violent. Hardcore protesters vandalised Chinese-owned banks and companies that are seen as hostile to the movement, and they threw petrol bombs at police. Police used water cannons to douse protesters in blue dye, used by authorities to identify demonstrators. Police also fired tear gas on the crowds. The protests in Hong Kong have been going on for nearly 5 months, and the weekend's events, which took place in a busy shopping district, weren't sanctioned by authorities. But that didn't deter tens of thousands of people from joining in. Many were wearing masks in defiance of a recent ban on face coverings at public gatherings. Claudia Mo is a pro-democracy legislator in Hong Kong and was at the protests on the weekend.
The police banned the rally, saying that, it's all due to public safety considerations and so on and so forth. And you can't help feeling that they're trying to incite this people against people fight. It's very Chinese Communist Party kind of tactic.
Claudia Mo, where do you see this protest movement going?
It's very difficult to see now. The government stands firm and the protesters also wouldn't budge. So we're at a deadlock. And right in the middle, there's just plenty of police brutality. And by police brutality, I mean arbitrary arrest and torture on site. Things are getting out of hand. Police aggressiveness is completely out of control.
Pro-democracy legislator Claudia Mo ending that report from Julia Holman. That's all we've got time for this evening. Thanks for joining us. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Southern DHB has apologised for breaching the rights of patients with lengthy delays for requested urology services. Police say they had already ramped up their presence in Wairoa before the weekend shootings at a police officer's house and the local police station building. The Mountain Safety Council says the death of a woman in the Tongariro National Park is a heartbreaking reminder of the importance of safe decision-making while tramping. And a slip on State Highway 7 near Greymouth is causing havoc for residents and some businesses blocked off from one of the main routes into the town. Those are the headlines. You're listening to RNZ National. We'll have news and weather again at 7 o'clock.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
There are other scripts, there's good ideas, we'll fund these one way or another, but 3 has been a great supporter.
Live with local, national and international stories and a slice of creativity.
My primary reason